Adopting a continuous learning mindset is and will continue to be needed to adjust to the changing healthcare landscape. Now we are going to witness a panel discussion on the future of ophthalmic practice. May I have on stage Dr. Malti, Dr. Sarvarna, and Dr. Arun Singhvi as panelists, and Dr. Vinay Garodia as the moderator.
Thank you. So it's been a very interesting conference. Let me thank Senthil and the organizing committee, Jodhpur, for inviting us. And we have already covered quite a lot of topics which are of interest. And we're just trying to visualize how the future, the near future is going to be there, and even the long-term future. So since we're talking about crystal ball and future gauging, so we thought we must take Arun Singhvi on board. So we got him on the last moment in here. And then Sarvana and, of course, Dr. Malti is there. And I think we'll like to keep about 5 minutes if there are any questions from the audience also, so we can take their answers as well. So a few questions that we have kind of thought about. So as I think Dr. Gyani did mention about that majority of the patients are going to become cashless now, and with the kind of price controls happening in terms of GIPSA, Ayushman Bharat and the other things. So I would like to know from the panelists, what do they predict in the near future, and maybe in the long-term future, how it's going to be. So I'll start with Arun.
So, I mean, cashless is the way forward. We take it today or tomorrow, we'll have to live with it. And along with cashless will come so many regulations of the government. So these are the two worries. I mean, cashless is still okay. The price points with coming time will reverse. Today we are being hurt, but probably they'll reverse in few years probably. But the only thing which worries more is the kind of regulations they are trying to put. For example, NABH. When people say, I mean, we are so quality conscious and we want patients safety first, then whole lot of ophthalmologists who had started their practices long back, it's extremely difficult to get it converted to according to the new regulations. If these regulations are strictly adhered to, probably half of the practices will have to go away. And this is the biggest worry I see. Cashless is still okay. I mean, you might say there's a working capital involved, etc. We are in a churning time, things will definitely improve. I'm being very positive about that things will improve. It's a churning time for another maybe 1 year or so. It'll be a movement where people will start rejecting it and things will improve. We saw, I mean, somebody from Jaipur, he would know it. We stopped cashless in Jaipur for a month and the prices were renegotiated. And the MOU is being signed probably it was signed yesterday or in a process of signing. So this will happen at every place. And things will improve, but this implementation of regulations is more of a worry. If they are implemented in the way they should be, then it's going to be difficult.
I think Arun is referring to linking cashless with NABH, with accreditation, and I think that's a problem, because the rates at which they have negotiated does not take into consideration even the input cost of the consumables and other currently applicable cost structure. So NABH cost structure is an entirely different ball game. What we must now understand is cashless is not the right term to say cashless. It is actually credit. We are actually giving credit to the government. Now, what happens is we were initially okay with giving credit for 15 days. Then it became credit for 1 month. Now it's becoming 3 months, 6 months. Someone said has an outstanding of 1,700 crores. Major hospitals have 1,700 crores outstanding. Credit in any form that is given like this is only going to have one solution, which is the government will come to you one day and say that we are going to give you a one-time settlement. We will give you 150 crores, we will give you 200 crores. And this is not, I'm not just telling it off the hook. This has happened in Karnataka. We have had social schemes, government schemes like Yashaswini and all, wherein they had similar outstandings of 1,200 crores, 1,300 crores. The government of Karnataka settled the issue by paying 192 crores. to all the hospitals, and they said, this is it. We are not going to entertain any more claims. And the unfortunate thing is you can't even go to court on this. So cashless is nothing but credit. And if the future is going to be cashless, I think we have to be really concerned.
So cashless is acceptable in private practice, but only problem I get is the settlement of the payment. They are not paying properly, so we are struggle with the monthly expenses. And also the smaller hospitals, not all the schemes are accepting the smaller private practitioners. So getting the cashless scheme itself, it's very difficult to get it, and the settlement payment also is very difficult.
So I think just to give my opinion on that, we all are, someone is optimistic, someone is complaining, but if we have the government on our side and says, what do you want? So what exactly do we want? And if I may give a small suggestion on that is, one, of course, the payment have to be done on time because that's a promise you have to deliver, or there has to be penalty on the government. Other thing what I think is that there are many patients who don't deserve a cashless, but they're given that cashless option. So say you're given from the GIPSA or someone you're given an authorization of 24,000. I feel the patient should be given that option of, okay, 24 is going to be covered by insurance or with Ayushman Bharat or whatever is going to be covered. You have an option of paying more, provided you feel that your doctor is giving you that kind of extra value, and then you can kind of pay that officially to us. So those who want to go for cheaper options, the cashless thing, they know that they are somewhere compromising the quality. But those who are going for the quality, they say, okay, this much is taken care by the government, and this extra I'm paying. Right now, there's a lot of opacity about that extra payment thing. So that's, if the government is listening to us, I would suggest that as a alternative to them. So because we have to also kind of think of what we want from the government. We can crib about it, but we have to ultimately come up with a solution also, which has to kind of sound reasonable. Now, coming to a related question on that, say like, as many people said, the smaller players are finding it difficult to get the cashless annulment, and cashless is the future, we all know. So all the other specialties we have seen, say you're a neurosurgeon, you don't have an option of starting your own setup, you have to be with a corporate, with all the problems of corporate world that is there, so the doctors don't have a say, the bills are huge, doctors don't get anything, but doctors get beaten up for that. Right now, we are very lucky that we're in ophthalmology, we can run our individual centers, and individual centers are doing much better than corporate people are doing. But how long can we continue on that? With the kind of regulations coming in, as Arun pointed out, and the fact that we are not able to get cashless in smaller places. So I think that's something that really worries me, that ophthalmology is also going the same way. And say 5-10 years down the line, we may have to shut our shop and join the corporates, except for a few big ones will survive. So what do you foresee the future in that aspect?
No, I personally feel I don't see it going the corporate way. Ophthalmology per se, I mean, people have tried to do it a corporate way, but still it's an individual practice, a group practice at the max. But then the only thing which is making it go corporate way is the kind of push received by the technology upgradation. That's where when I was just mentioning, we love technology, but then it has to be patient friendly is fine, but patient pocket friendly is another thing. If it adds significant value, only then. Otherwise, I mean, if we need to start a private practice, I don't see any challenges unless we just want to do it in a metro or a bigger city. We need to move to a relatively peripheral place, and single practitioners can do as good. So in ophthalmology, it will be the last chain to go corporate way.
How long? Because can it be a possibility that we will go the American way, that you have your clinics where you're seeing the patients, but for operating, you have to take your patients to a common center, be it a corporate hospital or something, because the norms are going to be so strict that for an individual to maintain an OT with the fire safety, with the Clinical Establishment Acts and all the cashless facilities, it might get more and more difficult for small-time practitioners to have their own OT. I mean, that's one concern.
I think the American way, then you have to say that American rates have to be applied. You cannot have it the American way with Indian rates being applied. So the problem here is now Dr. Vinay was saying, can we find a middle ground wherein there's a commitment from the government that they will pay within, say, 2 weeks or 4 weeks. Let us say that all these commitments are all on paper. There have been instances where even in the insurance sector, the TPS have disowned their own pre-authorizations. They have not honored any of the commitments that they have given. Second issue is there is no middle ground here. For example, in the telecom sector, you have only two modes of payment: prepaid and postpaid. So, if we are accepting a form wherein there is a postpaid mechanism, then the other form has to be prepaid. The government can create an escrow account for builders. The government can create an escrow account for big mergers. Why can't they create an escrow account wherein they deposit the money, wherein they deposit the Ayushman Bharat money, and from that account let them pay? Let them, as soon as the authorization is given, let them block that money, so that they cannot use that as a cross subsidy for some other reason and then deny us the payment. So there are mechanisms wherein they can ensure timely payment, but the government is not keen on doing all those things because they think that we do not deserve any of those things. That's the bottom line.
You want to answer?
I just wanted to add a point. The entire approach of ophthalmology has been to increase the charges from the government. Why doesn't anybody think of bringing down the cost of equipment? Because that will be more beneficial than raising the charges. Today, when Zeiss says that they're going to charge you 80 lakhs or 85 lakhs for a microscope, you're happily paying. Nobody questions Zeiss. Who decides the price? I mean, I was standing in American Academy buying a 90D lens many years ago. And this American ophthalmologist told me, can't you Indians who are doing such good work in software, can't you grind a lens and make a 90D? Now, nobody in the upper echelons will buy a Mira and Company's 90D. They want Zeiss or they want Vogue. The question is that the Prime Minister is crying horse, make in India. There is no effort to make in India. So my question is, if the Ophthalmic Association was to unite, I asked one of the dealers, I said, why can't you bring the price down? Because I'm told, and you may be able to answer that, when you buy in bulk for 4 centers, you get a better price than we get when we buy for one machine. The question is, why can't we all form a group and buy the machine? We'll knock 50% off. Then the person said, we're willing to give you 50% off, but we will not sponsor your conferences because we have a budget for that, which will go into pricing. So the question is, you have to decide whether you want to go the American way with 5-star conferences, international joints, and payment to the company, or you can all gang up like CGHS rates and say, we will not pay more than 40 lakhs for this 90 lakh microscope, take it or lump it. And anybody who pays more, BOA throws them out of the society. You will have the price coming down. You will say 50 lakhs in one deal, you'll never earn 50 lakhs from CGHS. That's a thought process.
Sir, I'd like to put in an example here. Conferences are not the only reason why prices are, no, they're not the main reason also. I'll give you an example. For example, I have a Nidec excimer laser machine. The cost of the premix cylinder used to be around 1.5 to 1.75 lakhs. So that was the cost structure for the past maybe n number of years. Now what happened was, they could not find a way of raising the cost. Then what happened, there was a war in Ukraine where Russia invaded Crimea. Then they said the source of all these noble gases is Ukraine, and because of the war, we are not able to import. The main supplier is not honoring his commitments. Then they jacked up the prices all of a sudden to almost 8 lakhs. Zeiss went up to even 10 lakhs. Now, here there is no ethical issues regarding the cost structures.
Doctor, that is what I'm
They
saying.
just need a reason to raise the cost.
That is because you're dealing with them one at a time. You deal with them as a group of 500, you'll have no problem.
Let's go to the, I think what Dr. Arun Sethi is telling you, Sarvana, that you covered the wrong topic about negotiation. Rather than negotiating with the patient, you should have taught us how to negotiate with the dealers, right? So I think the point was towards Dr. Sarvana, I think. Anyway, just jokes apart. So Dr. Malti would like to say something.
So individual practices definitely will survive in future, because why I'm telling is the individuals, definitely the family doctor practice will survive. They can make a good amount of money, but not in a money-making business like a huge amount, but reasonably a good amount they can make.
So the next question comes to a related topic. So individual practice, as we know that the kind of machines, believe it or not, the technology is improving, and whatever we may say, the next time a new thing comes in, we do get tempted to buy it, and there are benefits to it also. So are we looking at group practice as the future of ophthalmology? So, I mean, if that is so, then what would be the best option for a group practice One option can be the way I started and the way they have started and they are continuing with, that say there are two people who are the main decision makers, or there may be a group of 5 or 7 or 10 people who are there, like what Senthil was sharing with us about Bangladesh model, or there's a one owner and the others are associated with it. So what will be the kind of ideal kind of a group practice that we can look towards?
Sir, what you are talking about is a group of people practicing together. That was always the best way to do since eras. But by human nature, it's very difficult.
That's exactly.
It's extremely difficult. I'll just give you one example. We say cashless, etc. We launched our Guwahati hospital in 2016. We got empaneled with, there's a state scheme called ESIS, not ESIC. We did their patients and gave a credit of around 1.5 CR. And suddenly on accounts balance we saw 1.5 CR is no more available and they are not even paying us 10 lakh rupees. We just got de-empaneled. Still they didn't worry to pay us back. We filed a legal suit against them. We recovered the money within a year. Now comes the story. We opened a hospital a big hospital in Guwahati 2 months back. And the reality is we have again got empaneled with them. This is actually what is happening with all of us. We will say big things standing on podium, but the reality is nobody wants to group. Nobody wants to be together. Only once I have seen people from Bombay would say they have stood strong. But Jaipur I have seen.
Even Bombay, I think the inside story we have heard, it's not really.
Yeah,
working
Dr.
out.
Smith has told that time. Yeah, there are many stories. But then in Jaipur, I have seen for past 2 months we discontinued cashless, and probably we have been lucky enough to win the way. So, group practices are always the best way. But is it feasible? I don't know. I don't think so.
So my personal take is that group practice, the model that can probably succeed easily is that there's a one big guy who's making the decisions and others are joining in, and this guy has to be large-hearted and smart enough to take care of these people who are joining, not try to trample them on their shoes, because it is wise and it is honest, both.
True.
So I think, but if there are too many decision makers, the kind of example what he said about the two families living together under one roof is an exception than the rule. So as he said, group practice is easier said than done. Yeah. So that's exactly what I wanted to highlight.
I think that's true, because any group practice will succeed only if there's a connect among the group members. And that connect cannot be just business. You cannot say that I'm going to have, for example, even with Dr. Debashish in Calcutta, all the 4 people have a connect among themselves. They know each one knows his family members. They attend their functions, their weddings. So there is unless and until the connect is there, the group will not succeed. Because we had a system wherein in Bangalore where there was a group called as Jyoti Lasik, or something like 17 members joined together, pooled in money and brought in all the equipments, and then they were running successfully for almost, let's say, 15 years, or maybe more than that also. But today what has happened is some of the staff members have looted money, and they have actually encashed the fixed deposits of that particular group practice, and the actual original investors are now left with just color xerox of the fixed deposits. So the problem is, when there is a profit, one person wants to run away with the lion's share of the profit. Now either it is the original investor, or it is the main chief big doctor who has started the practice, or it is the government, or it is some unscrupulous person in the staff. So someone wants to run away with the lion's share of the profit. Now, even in a group practice, you have to have systems in place to ensure that the proceeds of the profits that are generated are actually divided in an equitable manner. Because without that particular thing happening, in due course of time, someone will run away with the lion's share of the profit. And then you will be left with just something like a color xerox. All the fixed deposits will be there with you, but then they cannot be encashed.
So one thing, I think there should be an exit policy defined when you're joining and starting a group. Though that is something like you're talking about divorce when you're marrying, but that I think is a very important document, and someone outsider has to sit through the whole plans, I think.
So in
But
current
in a lighter way, I would like to say that, your lengthy talk about the lasers in Bangalore actually goes to show that ophthalmologists cannot be trusted. They're
Humans,
running away with the profits.
humans, not
No, that's what I'm
ophthalmologists.
saying. So as humans, if they can't be trusted, then we are all sitting under one hall and debating together. No, I'm just bringing out a different point. What I'm trying to say
It
is,
was not ophthalmologists who ran away with
I'm
the
just
thing.
joking.
It
What
was
I'm trying to say is,
ancillary staff.
what I'm trying to say, why can't a group practice? Because you said now that not everybody can live under the same roof and cook food together. My question is, Vinay Garodia is running a clinic with so many doctors visiting it. The question is, it's not a group practice because he's a one-man show who invests and the rest come. So I think group practice is going to come. It's just a question of time, and it's not going to be by choice. It's going to be by circumstances, and it'll happen, like NABH. Because you will never be able to recover the cost of the future equipment if you work as a
It's going
single
to happen. I'm just discussing about the two options where 2 or 3 people pool in their money and they're co-owners versus there's one owner and the others are kind of partners in it. So, I mean, that's the kind of model that we are kind of discussing, the options.
in future, like solo practitioner cannot buy all the equipments, mainly diagnostic equipments. Maybe the practice is different, but for the diagnostic investigations, surgical also, the group practice is the way. Otherwise, we cannot afford, individual practitioner cannot afford all the equipments and things. So group practice, the only way we can go about it in the future.
Coming to the next very, very important, something very close to my heart. I think all of us agree that the trust factor is hugely lacking. And to a great extent, we are responsible for it. And to some extent, the media, the society, the way it's changing. So what would you suggest that we should, where do we look at the doctor-patient relationship in the future? And what can possibly be done to win back the trust factor? Because I personally feel in the future, your integrity is going to be the defining factor. Like in my organization, we talk about 3 things: compassion, competence, and integrity. So these are the 3 building blocks that are there for any practice. And competence is of course important, but along with that, how honest you are to the patient and how you are able to convey that message to the patient is going to be very, very important. So what do you think, how can we get back that trust factor? It cannot be the blind trust that we used to have earlier. So what I would personally prefer is the informed consent and informed trust should be there. They should be aware that what they are going in for. They should be aware about the limitations. It is not that aap to Bhagwan ho, but they should understand that you are doing your best, but then again, the circumstances may not be totally under your control.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been like communication is the most important way to win the trust. Whatever papers you get signed or whatever consents are there, at the end of the day, I mean, Dr. Vinay, me and you and Dr. Savna, I was the JR, you were the SR. We have seen Dr. Garg doing, on-table choroidals and on-table, suprachoroidal, and informing the patient very next day morning that your eyes were giving me signs, iris was prolapsing, but just my mind couldn't understand it and I messed up with your eyes. This is the comment I've heard as JR and these 2 people with my SR. And the patient got the other eye operated by him after 2 months or so. So that's something, the way of communication helps. I mean, you tell him whatever has gone wrong, how has it gone wrong, give enough time. That's the only way to bring in trust. Whatever we get it on paper doesn't work. I feel so.
I think the only way that we can bring back the trust factor or take care of the trust deficit is by revisiting what we are actually telling the patient. So today the communication to the patient is actually bordering on patient ecstasy. It is not patient happiness anymore. We want to make the experience as ecstatic as possible. We want the patient to actually jump in joy. Now, when you actually over-promise preoperatively and under-deliver, there will be, even if the patient is reading 6/6, he will have a trust deficit. So I think the key is to actually under-promise and then over-deliver if possible in a particular case. But then let us not over-promise and under-deliver. Let us always be conservative, under-promise and over-deliver. The second issue that you can actually take care of in making sure that the trust deficit does not occur is not to talk ill about your competition. If the patient wants to go and take a second opinion, let him go and take a second opinion. So in fact, there may be times where you actually encourage a second opinion. If for some reason you feel that this patient is not going to recover to a 6/6 level of vision, whether it is retinal surgery, whether it is cataract surgery, if you feel that this is a difficult case, this is a challenging case, the patient will not recover 6/6 vision, he may be 6/9, 6/12, whatever, it's always better to even encourage a second opinion. Give him the option that he may probably go to a second doctor and take an additional opinion, and then he can always come back to you if he finds that you are a reasonable person to actually get his surgery done with. I think these are two things where we have to sort of emphasize, re-emphasize ourselves, and then follow it to the core.
Actually, patients still have trust on us. That's the reason we are doing so many surgeries on their eyes, because eyes are very important for them than other organs. So we are doing so many surgeries on their eyes. So patients still have trust. To maintain that trust is, we have to be like, again, the patient relationship with the doctor, like we should treat our patients as our relatives, like not like a patients, they are paying the money. We are utilizing our skills and treating as like our relatives. Then the trust will not go away. One-on-one relationship should be there, it will be there always.
Yeah, patients are getting surgery because they don't have an option. I think that's also a fact, but let us face it. People think about whatever you're suggesting with a doubt. I mean, that most of us have faced now. And I think the only thing that I would say, I think, of course, we should not criticize the other surgeons. That is very, very important. I'll give you my own example. I do cataracts also. I get a patient who has been operated by cataract in one eye. He comes for the other eye surgery to me. I tell them, whoever has done your first eye has done a lovely job. Not a single patient has said, okay, doctor, I'm going back to my first doctor. So it doesn't help to criticize others. In fact, if you don't criticize others, the patient's, your value in the patient's eyes increase. You have immediately established that you are an honest and trustable guy. After that, even if you make him blind because of some complications, he would understand that you are being honest about it. Number two, what I follow is if a patient wants to do a billing, say I want to get a LASIK done, please bill me for something else. I say, no, we don't do that. The moment you bend rules for other things, he's going to think that you are doing it for the money, and then if you can lie to the insurance companies, then you're going to lie to him also. So don't give in to these demands of the patients. And I think what we have to again make a difference is the kind of trust that was there in the past was that you were God. We cannot and we should not get back that trust, because the moment someone calls you God, God is the first person whom you criticize when something goes wrong. So don't try to be God. Try to say we are going to do whatever best we can do, but make them understand that this is a surgical procedure. Though it has been made it is not a simple procedure, but because of the innovations and because of our efforts and our training, it has been made into a simple procedure. So there's a difference. You have to take the credit for cataract being a simple procedure rather than calling it a simple procedure. Don't demean yourself. Say that you are so trained that you can do it so well, but despite that, it is not a 100% safe thing. Nothing is 100% safe. So never guarantee results, guarantee your efforts, and make them understand that they are undergoing a surgical procedure. It is not something which is small. Don't belittle the procedure, and be human. Don't try to be God. I think that is the bottom line that I would like to say about gaining trust. And I think all of us have to follow these things, then only as a society the trust we can build up. Are we out of time? Or there's one small question I would like to ask. Are we on? Okay. Thanks. If anyone from the audience has any questions or any comment? All of you are ophthalmologists, and then you want to give time for the entrepreneurship. How do you handle it? You have clinical work also, you want to give time for entrepreneurship. How do you handle it? Sir, an entrepreneurship doesn't require a separate time, actually. When you're operating, it is such a boring job, your mind is anyway working. And the surgical times have become so short that now another problem why we are looking at growth is because our time, the surgical time has become so less. Earlier, someone would do 4 cataracts, he'll be very happy. Today, he's finished 4 cataracts in half an hour. Now, what will he do after that? Then he says, okay, let me start doing some charity work also. My OT is lying vacant, let me do this also. So the big established players are now doing the charity work also. The problem that is happening, the newcomers who are coming in, these poor people have nothing to do. You go to a big institution, they are doing surgery for 5,000 rupees up to 1.5 lakhs rupees. They are not leaving any sector open for the newcomers. And actually, that's the question I was trying to ask. The next was that when a newcomer is going to join in a practice, I mean, how would he survive? Does he have to take up a job, or can he establish his own thing, and can he be an entrepreneur at all in the future? Because it's becoming more and more difficult for these new kids who are coming out in practice now.
Answer first to Dr. Vinay is, I mean, when the stalwarts, the elder people who transitioned from one technology to other, from ICC to ECC to SICS to FACO, it was a hard transition to do with, I mean, technology. So ours is like, you have to move from Mumbai to Thane to Kalyan to Ambarnath to Samgaon. I mean, this is the transition which the youngster will have to start with. You'll have to move away from the city and then probably, I mean, hope for the best. Because it's getting too crowded, everybody has said that. Either join a corporate hospital or do a group practice, struggle will be same. I mean, if you want to do it on your own, try and take the peripheral end of the city and struggle a bit. Everybody has struggled. I mean, we had our different struggles, they'll have their difference. It's just the difference of struggle which has come. They'll have to change their geographies.
So don't you feel that if you have to struggle hard, why not to struggle at a place where you can gain more? Maybe
Yeah.
in a city center, then going in the periphery. If you have to work the same amount, so why not to work somewhere where you, in the long term you can gain more?
Yes, in city
This
center.
is what how I look at like.
City center, you'll have to, I mean, it'll be very, very tough to start a single practice. In city
That's
center,
okay.
I mean, how will you start it? You ought to have that
so
amount
do you
of.
think it will be easier for a newcomer to start a practice in the periphery?
Yeah.
But he'll not get the number of patients there.
No,
So
he'll have
both
good number
sides
of.
the coin.
He'll have good number of patients and he'll have less money spent in infra and machines. I mean, you start in Delhi and you don't have an OCT, you're stuck. I mean, people would go to other places once they are, advised that. And if you do that, the same in, say, most peripheral end,
So you're advising that first you struggle in the periphery, you make a mark for yourself, and then you come to
No,
a bigger
no.
city.
I'm saying
You stay there in the periphery then.
yes. If you want to go solo, that's the place to be.
Depends on the buffers that you have.
Yes.
How can you bleed and still be in the market?
Yeah.
Depends on your parents.
I think very few people start off solo in the periphery. What most of the newcomers do is they get attached to a major multi-specialty hospital,
Yes.
and then their feeding comes in from there. These multi-specialty hospitals act like aggregators, like you have Ola aggregator, Uber. So these aggregate the both in the bottom of the pyramid, the middle of the pyramid. So they aggregate patients, and then there's a spillover effect. Some of the patients they want to get operated in your private practice. So very few people I know actually start off on a solo practice, sitting in a clinic, starting off with a slit lamp, and then really making it big. At least in the 21st century. They used to do that in the 20th century. There are multiple instances of that. That model having been a phenomenal success. But I think in the 21st century, you cannot rely on that model. Most of them, they get associated to multi-specialty hospitals, work for 5 to 10 years with them, and then, then there's a transition, there's a transfer of patients from that database to your database, and then you start off from that particular point onwards.
And Dr. Shah, to answer your question, initially the struggle would be there to divide time between the two things, but slowly, one is you get used to it. Second, you slowly start leaving clinicals. You'll have to. You cannot actually balance the two. You'll have to start taking a back seat, otherwise something or the else will suffer.
If you want to go his way,
Yeah.
go that way.
Sir is already 4-5 centers. So,
The point is, I think there's no point opening 20 centers, 50 centers, 200 centers, 300 centers. That has to stop somewhere. The point is you have to learn to do something else apart from ophthalmology, so that in your free time, like how he said, he said do community work in your free time. But then you have to start doing golf, okay? Do something else. Spend your money, spend your time, have a productive life. But then don't get stuck to ophthalmology to the point where you're actually doing free service down the line, and then you're actually affecting your paid clientele.
Dr. Sethi has gone away, so it's very easy to.
For the beginners as well as the small.
Very good.
Yeah. So what
That's
does
very
we have in my it is nearby my hospital. I requested my friends to please refer the patients to me. So what used to happen, the patient used to obviously come to me for it was a bigger center. कि भाई हम तो इधर ही दिखाएंगे, वहाँ वापस नहीं जाना. So we started a lab which is just around 100 meters away from our hospital. And the guy who sits in that place, he just sends me a WhatsApp photograph of the perimetry and the prescription. Once I say okay, then only the patient is freed and normal is the referral. So that will be a good idea for in terms of group practice. I don't think so we can do a group practice in cataract surgery. Because once a guy who is operating around 8 to 10 cases per month, automatically he'll think of installing his own phaco machine. But regarding investigations, I think it is a good option in bigger cities.
I think we have overshot the time, so I'll thank all the panelists. And just to say, everyone have to define his own OPM. So if you like to open up 100 centers, you definitely go ahead. There's nothing right or wrong, but you have to define your own OPM. Thanks.